for joining us today. We decided to kick this off around wind season just because we have a pretty decent book of business subject to hurricanes and other wind events. And there's a lot of things that are just kind of colloquial knowledge on the underwriting side that we thought could be a good topic for kind of everybody to kind of know about too. So Morgan, fun. Yep, thank you. This is our agenda for today. I'm going to introduce myself because I think it's been a while since I've done one of these. So it's always good to kind of get an idea of who it is that's talking to you, right? We're going to touch on the BOP real quick as it exists right now and a couple of new features that we've launched over the last couple of months. Then we're going to dive right into it. We're going to talk about how to prepare for wind season and then things to kind of check off the list right before the wind event happens, things to do as soon as it's over and it's safe to get back out there. And then we've also kind of synthesized some of this information into some resources for everybody that are just really easy to hand over to somebody, have them fill it in, and it gives them a good head start to kind of get started to get all this information in one place for them before wind season really starts to kick off. So a little bit about me. I'm talking fast. I will slow that down for you. Apologies. I'm from New York, and it's a very bad habit of mine. Thank you for letting me know that. My title is the Insurance Product Manager. I've been at Attune for 2.5 years. Been in the insurance industry for it's over a decade at this point. My job is managing the BOP product, the accredited BOP product that we own. Setting strategy for it, deciding where we want to. No worries, Kelly. I appreciate the heads up. Deciding where we want to go with it, where we want to take it, any sort of new coverages that we're willing to take a look at. Just basically guiding that product through our many iterations. Previously, I've been at Chubb, the Hartford, and the Hanover, all pretty big names before landing in InsurTech. And my fun fact is I have a goal to go to every state in the country, and I've been to 26. So a little more than halfway there. BOP overview, how it exists right now and where we're going. So we are currently still available in all states and Washington, the District of Columbia, with the exception of Hawaii and Alaska and the state of Minnesota. New ventures are eligible. We have no limits on the number of employees. We call this one out specifically because when we were still running the Blackboard product, we did have a limit on the number of employees. So that was removed when we moved to the accredited paper, which is a pretty big benefit for everybody. The loss history is pretty much standard. Max 3 claims in the past 5 years, and the total incurred needs to be less than $20,000. Now, cats are excluded from this because, let's face it, there's not much that you can do in regards to a cat event, right? It's just kind of luck of the draw as to where you're located rather than anything that you've done to contribute to that loss. So we don't penalize folks for that. Next step is the max limit that we have per location and account. So it's $9.5 million total insured value for the entire account and $4.75 million per location. So that means at any single address, you can't have more than 4.75, but if you have multiple addresses or multiple locations on the policy, it goes up to the 9.5 limit per policy. Maximum floor area per location is 10,000 for restaurants and 50,000 square feet for all other classifications. And we do require ITV for building and business personal property coverage. So 100% of value. There's also, we built into the portal within the last year what we refer to as like a costimator, which is basically if you are looking to get like a ballpark as to what your what it would cost to replace your building. As you're going through the portal, it should come up with like a prompt if you're too far under value and be like, hey, listen, we think it's closer to this number. You know, take a look and see if that's reasonable for you. And we put that in there specifically as a tool to help our brokers, you know, kind of figure that out because insurance to value is important, especially in an environment where inflation's pretty high, right? And the limit that you had last year may not be enough for this year. So we built that in there for you. Next one, Morgan.
Yeah, before we bop over to that, bop, wow, I didn't even try that time. We have a question from Francis. be writing new business in Florida with wind?
We are still not writing new business in Florida. Florida is still on a pause for us. But the existing book as it stands right now, we do have a pretty sizable book in Florida.
Thank you.
Sure. What did we add to the BOP? Over the last few months, we have made stopgap available in the portal. So if you're quoting something with the available states right now in North Dakota, Ohio, and Wyoming, and then also Washington State, once that one gets built into the system, you can automatically select it in the portal. The coverage provided is a standard ISO wording. So if you're familiar with ISO's form for this, it is the exact same form that we use. No surprises there. And then you can select it in the quote flow. So it's already priced and included in the quote. So it's kind of one-stop shopping. We did give back a hired and non-owned auto for select restaurant codes in select states. We're kind of running this one as a pilot right now, but it is available currently in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado. For class codes is listed here. They tend to be like the family restaurant codes, and one of them is the pizza class code. This can be added on new business in the quote flow, but if you also have a renewal that needs it, you can just send an email to our customer care team and they can have it added to you for the quote too. And then this is our newest one, is we are including the automatic AI endorsement. Anything that gets quoted in the portal from today on will automatically have the proprietary endorsement that's listed on here included on the quote. Long story short, as long as the contract or the agreement or the permit meets the requirements in the endorsement, coverage is automatically afforded for it. This is available in all of our eligible BOP states right now. The one exception to this is going to be New York, because we just have a couple filing quirks with the state of New York, as we always do, as everybody does. And so that will not attach in the state of New York, but once that also gets approved, once the filing is done, it will also flow into this workflow. Next one, Morgan. All right, preparing for wind season. What do you do before the event even starts? So it's a big deal to kind of know where your suppliers are, know where your vendors are, just because if you have any sort of interruptions to your location, there's a possibility that they may be out of the affected area, or they might be also in the affected area. And so it's good for the insured to know, where are they all located, right? There's a good question here, which is, if I'm a business owner, I should think about any sort of critical suppliers that may be in the area that would also be affected by the same event. Because if I'm going to rely on them to get my business back up and running, then I need to make sure that they have the ability to get back up and running in time. And if they don't, maybe I should try and start to develop a relationship with somebody outside of the area so that I'm able to get what I need in a timely fashion, and I'm not kind of stuck on someone else's ability to get back up and running. Another important resource is creating a business continuity plan. So that we reference here ready.gov, and this is basically a government preparedness website that's updated to include a step-by-step program to walk business owners through how to create a business continuity plan that's pretty in line with what the insurance industry recommends. It's completely free and it's available in multiple formats. So there's a PDF version for somebody who wants to download it and really likes to have that piece of paper in front of them to learn from. But there's also YouTube videos that kind of break down the process into pretty manageable steps. And it will walk you through the entire process. So it begins with defining what are your business objectives after disaster, lets you identify and address any potential risks and impacts, lets you develop strategies to address these identified risks and how to structure your teams or employees after the event, and kind of delegate responsibilities so that everybody knows their job, like as this is happening and afterwards. And then it also kind of gives you an idea of how to test your plan before it actually happens, so that the first time that you're kind of running through it isn't during the wind event. Now, all businesses may not need all facets of the plans that they describe, but it gives a pretty good blueprint for a business to follow to create their own plan that could potentially help them get back up and running faster. Something else to keep in mind too is if your business relies on tourist dollars, right? Or people who don't necessarily live in the area, but come in for, tourist seasons where things might pick up a little bit. You might want to think about how have something that's set aside so that if the business dips because you have a few tourists around, a few less tourists around because of the event, think about, what would you need from a staffing perspective? What would you need from a resource perspective? And include that in the business continuity plan. It's also important to create backups of important information. No surprise to anybody here, but power tends to go down during a wind event. It's not unusual. And so if the only place that you have this place for important documentation to be stored is on a computer that maybe either can't be powered or the batteries run out, or you have a limited time, with the computer working, it might be good to have backups of things in a physical format so that you can actually access those in the event of a power outage. It doesn't hamper you as much as it could. And then the question they would ask there is just, would you need power to access your choice of storage? On to the next one. So something else to remember is within your policy form, there is this preservation of property coverage. This is in the ISO base form, and we've kind of cut it out here and put it in front of the screen. And this is something that really gets overlooked. So basically what this calls out is that if you move your items, whatever your business personal property is, as long as it's covered property, and you're moving it to another location to try and avoid damage from the covered peril, right? So it's a hurricane is coming and you have some business personal property that you're just not keen on leaving in the building, and you have access to move it to a place that's much safer, much more secure. The coverage will extend to wherever it's being moved to a temporary location, and it'll cover it for the 30 days. So even though the area may not be, quite up and running and quite, fully reopening and everything, you still have 30 days. That kind of buys you some leeway, right? And so did want to call this out in the form because it is something that's pretty overlooked, but I think is pretty key if a business is able to move their property off site. We don't want to have them worrying that maybe there's not coverage for it. It's in the form. They have it. Next slide. So here we created a rundown of things to check before the wind event happens. Test generators, because that's one of those things that you tend to keep for a pretty significant amount of time, right? If you're going to buy a generator, it's a pretty big investment. And so it's also one of those things that you tend to only check out and monitor kind of when you need it, right? So it's a good idea to make sure at the beginning of wind season that they work, right? And that you have properly stored fuel for the generators. Just so when you need them, everything's kind of already there. Test your hurricane shutters to ensure they close and seal properly. It's not unusual for buildings to flex and kind of settle after some time. And so if you've had to use the shutters in the past year, especially, they may have warped a little bit. So just test those right at the beginning of the season, make sure they close, make sure they seal properly. If you don't have hurricane shutters, then it's the recommended plywood to get is a minimum of 5/8 of an inch. This is something that tends to grow legs and walk once a storm is announced. So it's one of those things where if you can grab it for the sizes that you need at the beginning of the season, and you have storage for it, excellent. If not, maybe just put it as one of those things at the top of the list that you take care of as soon as you hear that a storm is coming. And then don't forget about weirdly sized spaces like garage doors. We tend to find that things like garage doors tend to be replaced less than entrance doors to buildings. And that makes them a little bit older, make them a little bit less reliable. And so you're more likely to have those be at risk in a wind event just because it's not as frequently as replaced as like an entrance door is. Make sure you've got some contact information that's current for all employees and anybody that's kind of critical to your business. It's very easy to, rely on your email and people's signatures to give you their contact information. But having that in a physical format, someplace that's safe, is also a really smart option to have in the event that you don't have power after the storm, but you need to get into contact with somebody. Flashlights and batteries should be stored in easily accessible areas, but the batteries change pretty regularly. This comes especially in handy if you can store them somewhere near an entrance that you would be using, so that after the event, as soon as you get into the building, everything you need is kind of right there in the doorway, so that it's easily accessible. And then physical keys are another thing that tend to get up and walk in the confusion. And so at minimum, you should have an extra set, and they should be secured in 2 different places to make sure that, they're not subject to, both of them getting lost at the same time. Next one, Morgan. After the wind event, monitor any sort of local media sources, TV, radio, social media, to determine when it's safe for you to get to check on the business. And the one thing that we do stress, because we also have seen losses from this, is before you go into any sort of building, walk the outside of it to make sure there's no obvious safety issues. Can't help the business if you yourself are injured. And so it's important to make sure that before you even enter the building, that it's safe for you and anybody else that's with you. Next one, Morgan. After it. From our book, we've also seen that power lines tend to go down. As you're walking outside, make sure that you're mindful of that. Again, your safest bet is to assume that these are live and to not come into contact with them if you don't have to. Take similar caution when you go to turn on the power in the building. Make sure the electrical system is dry and the utility power is available before flipping any breakers. Check any sort of protection that you used to cover the windows, the doors, inventory of fixtures. It might need to be replaced and or removed. And then also take detailed photos and videos of any damages that you find on the property or any of the inventory that you have for documentation purposes. And so when you make a claim, it's kind of the information they're going to be looking for. Resources for insureds. So what we're going to be sharing with you is the preparedness checklist. And then also on that checklist also includes the claims contact information, because that's also something else that tends to be a little bit tough to find after a wind event. So it's all here on your screen if you want to take a screenshot of it. And it's also going to be on the resource that we email out to you. And then it's also just a template for a contact list so that anybody who has any sort of contacts they want to put in one place, it's all the templates there for you. Examples of both of them are on your screen right now. And it looks like we have a question. How about without wind in Florida? So our filing in the state of Florida doesn't allow us to write policies without wind coverage. The FLOIR did not approve that for us. So we cannot write without wind in Florida. So great question. And then next one up, Morgan. There we go. So thank you for joining with us today. And then let's see, any other quotes? Is there a way to verify? Is there a way to verify a quote before it is issued? The class code is appropriate for the prospect. That's a good question. You can always chat into our customer care team and they're able to field those questions. And if they have any sort of confusion about it, they can also tell you what they would need to know. So in order to clarify it, but chatting in with them or calling in with them too is usually the option that we suggest.
And if I could add to that, we have a new feature in the portal as well that is pretty cool. So we have an appetite checker that's available in the portal. So if you go to that sort of like scroll bar on the left-hand side of your screen when you're in the portal, you'll see there's a new button that says appetite, and you can search by state and like the, the class type, so pizza shop or whatever. And it'll let you know if that is eligible in that state. So not a complete solution to your question, but if you just like at least want to make sure that what you're writing is going to work a little quicker than trying to go through a quote.
At this point, open it up to any other questions that anybody may have.
I have a question, Christa.
Sure.
While we're waiting for others. Would you be able to just talk about like what different types of wind events there are? Because I know when we are talking to other people at Attune, just wondering, what does a wind event even mean? Like, we all know hurricanes, but what are some other things that, you wouldn't necessarily think of when you think of wind event?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Hurricanes are the most popular one, but the policy also covers tornadoes, which is a little bit tougher to sometimes deal with because they tend to happen more at random rather than hurricanes do. And they also are much quicker events than hurricanes are, right? So being prepared for them is more of an all year thing rather than just a seasonal event. The other one is derechos, which is basically inland hurricanes. The last one we saw was in 2020 or 2021 in Iowa. So pretty big one. And these happen less frequently, but when they do, they're still pretty tough wind events as well. And so that's something else to be thinking about, especially if you're more towards like the middle of the country.
And this is just me being curious now. And so would that also would that also be similar to like a nor'easter or something, like something that has strong winds, but isn't necessarily like a hurricane or a tornado? Do you know what I mean?
So it's closer to a nor'easter in the fact that you're not going to measure it by how fast the wind is going, right? Yeah. It can still be pretty devastating, especially if it's closer to like a low level hurricane, especially in areas that kind of aren't made for that kind of wind event to begin with. And so the damages that we see from those, even though they're more rare, are still pretty severe as well.
Yeah. So like basically having this sort of like emergency plan for anyone, but we're talking specifically about insureds, no matter where they are in the country, is probably helpful. Just because, even myself looking at this plan, just like me as a person, I was like, oh, I should like be more prepared for, what I mean? Like there's always, if there were a hurricane to happen in Philadelphia where I live,
yeah,
I wouldn't know anyone's phone number, like my parents' phone numbers, but that wouldn't be helpful, like.
Right.
So. All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Can give people just a couple more minutes. But if not, thank you all so much for attending, and thank you for the participation. We will be sending out an email with all the resources we discussed here, including the PDFs, and I'll include a link to the ready.gov. You'll get the attachment of the slide deck and everything. So if you have any questions or want to review it, you can always do it that way, or reach out to your account manager or our customer care team, and we'd be happy to help you out. All right, well, thank you so much, Christa. Always a pleasure. And I hope that you and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.